Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Control Alt Love, where we are talking about alternative relationships, alternative love, and changing how we view modern love today. So today I have my co-host Leslie Ann Peterson, and we are talking about emotional libertarianism. So because she's got, the credentials and everything, I want to go ahead and let her define what emotional libertarianism is and why it is that we should be emotionally libertarian. So Leslie, why don't you take it away and explain, a little bit to our audience about emotional libertarianism, what it is, and why it's so important.
Okay, so emotional libertarianism in a nutshell starts with the basic belief that emotions are biologically and psychologically based within us. So, in layman's terms, that means your emotions are caused by reactions in your brain to certain stimuli. If your partner says one thing and it upsets you, that is because it is something inside of your brain that has already primed you to be upset by that trigger. Experiences in our past shape our neural responses to stimuli. This is why we have things like PTSD or anxiety disorders, panic disorders. But the wonderful thing about this and the idea behind emotional libertarianism is since we can be aware and are aware that our emotions come from internal bases, biases, beliefs, that we have the ability to process and change our reaction and our experiences with these stimuli.
Right, and that all really comes from examining our current beliefs and theories and looking at not only what they are, but where they come from. So where they come from is just as important as what we think. So when we examine where our ideas and our beliefs and our emotions come from, we are able to kind of look at it from an objective perspective and say, okay, so this is the experience or the belief that I have that makes me feel this way about this thing that this person is saying. So you'll see that different people have different reactions to the things that we say. So some people get extremely upset and emotional when you talk about cats, and that's because their cat has recently died. And so that is why we're responsible for our own feelings, is because we can't ever know how someone is going to react. We would have to know their entire life story and their entire belief system in order to be able to know how someone else is going to react. So it's impossible for someone else to control your feelings. If they wanted to manipulate your feelings, then I think that would be decently easy to do, but that's mainly because most people don't have a handle on their emotions. Somebody who does, however, is able to not feel upset when other people say things that may seem upsetting to them. What do you think, Leslie?
I completely agree. I do want to preface all of this with we have the ability to control our reactions to stimuli, that we're not violating our rights in any way. So to say that we can control our emotions to an event is all fine and well, assuming that our rights haven't been violated. Once our rights have been violated, that is where we have a automatic response to the stimuli that we don't really have the ability to control.
Absolutely agreed.
Preface that because some people are going to be a little confused, assume, well, what if this guy rapes me? Then I have the ability not to be upset? No, that is a violation of your fundamental rights. So
exactly. And that's built into our DNA, that we're hardwired to feel that way about a reaction, or our DNA it's built in our DNA to react to someone violating our basic human rights with disdain or upset. And so we have negative emotions because that's a protection mechanism. And it's totally understandable when someone's physically controlling you to I mean, that's when they would be able to emotionally control you. There is ways that you can, I mean, there are really strong people that you can't emotionally control when you're physically controlling them, but I wouldn't say that that's like an aim or a goal for anybody. It's okay to feel upset when someone's physically controlling you.
And you're going to feel upset. It's how you respond to that feeling of upset.
Right.
That's where libertarianism, emotional libertarianism, comes into play.
Right. And I think that it's about the really strong people internally. They're the ones that are able to move on from that experience quickly. It's not so much that it doesn't affect them the same way during the experience, but they're able to move on after the experience versus people who have lived maybe a harder life and haven't been as emotionally prepared for the situation, that will have a very hard time getting over a control situation. But I wanted to focus too much on violations of rights because that's not really where emotional libertarianism plays in. But it is important, and I'm glad that you mentioned that in a control situation, it doesn't apply. However, emotional libertarianism has a lot of positive impacts to your life. So while it sounds like a difficult thing to be somebody that owns your own feelings, I mean, what's the upside here? I mean, why should I want to take control of my own emotions? And what I would say is you have the ability at this point to be happy whenever you want. You can make yourself happy. Even in the worst situation, you can make yourself happy. And that's what's so liberating and awesome about it. And that's why I love the term emotional libertarianism, because you can make yourself feel free and liberated from the environment that you are in. So what would you have to say about that, Leslie?
See, I think you and I have a very different fundamental understanding there. When I say emotional libertarianism, I'm not saying that I can make myself happy. I'm saying that I understand where my emotions are coming from, and I have the ability to react in whichever way. I'm not saying that I can immediately make myself happy, because I know I can't immediately make myself happy. But I know that I can recognize the triggers and the bases for my reactions to certain situations, and hence be able to respond in a emotionally mature way to the situation.
Yeah, I think for me, I've spent a lot of time working on my emotions, and I'm able to get to happy fairly quickly. And I think if it's something that you work on, you're able to get there very, very quickly if you, first of all, understand that you have control over your emotions, and second of all, train that response, because it's not automatic. Our society has taught people to believe that they don't have control over their emotions and that any emotion at any time is perfectly okay. We train the idea that people just feel the way they feel about things. And when we live in a society that emphasizes no control over your own emotions, then how will people ever take ownership for those emotions? I mean, that's my point of view on it. What do you think?
I actually disagree with you again, and this is going to be a great show. My understanding of emotional libertarian is it's a belief that every individual is entirely responsible for his or her own emotional responses, and that one person's behavior is never the cause of another person's emotion. In this definition, you have the emotion you're feeling already built in. I think that the key in emotional libertarianism to me is that I recognize this emotion as being valid, but I don't have to act on it because I see where in my past that has primed me to that reaction, to the emotional reaction to the situation. And I think there's a fundamental difference there between what you're saying and what I'm saying.
Interesting. See, I agree with you. There must just be a disconnect some other way, because I totally agree with what you're saying.
Well, didn't you just say that you disagree with the idea that society is accepting any emotion as being valid? I think one of the key things of emotional libertarianism is recognizing your response to a situation, the emotional response to a situation as valid, but that doesn't necessarily imply that somebody else has to do something about it.
Well, I mean, I agree with the second part. I think that your reaction to any particular situation isn't necessarily valid. I think that there are a lot of situations that people take things out of context, and I don't think that an emotion is valid just because it exists. I think that emotions are only valid when they're well thought out. So, I mean, my immediate emotional reaction to things, well, you know, I'm going to feel that anyway, doesn't necessarily make that emotion valid. I mean, it's not negative because it just is. We have emotional reactions to things naturally, but that doesn't necessarily make it valid. And do you kind of see what I'm saying?
What is valid in your definition, though?
So valid to me is that it is appropriate it's an appropriate response to the stimuli. And so if I felt,
how is an emotion? An emotion is just a feeling, not a reaction or an action of any sort. How is an emotion inappropriate? If you can look back and see, this is what has happened in my past, this is what's priming me for this, how is an emotion inappropriate?
I would say that a emotion can be inappropriate when, you know, say I get mad at my cats for knocking something off of the furniture. I technically can't really be mad at my cats. They don't know any better. And so I would say that it's not a valid reaction to the situation. It's not warranted. I will feel mad. That doesn't mean
that's an emotion. You have the emotion of anger is completely valid. It's how you react that can be valid or invalid. That's inappropriate or inappropriate. A feeling can't be inappropriate.
I think we disagree fundamentally on this, and I'm not sure that we're going to get any closer to agreeing on this. I'm very firm in the fact that some emotions are invalid, but we should save this for another show because there's a lot to discuss, and I don't want to, you know, I mean, I think we're both making valid points, and I think that our audience will just have to make up their own mind. So, you know, disagreements happen, but, you know, we should have a show solely based on it. But one of the things that, you know, we really touched on, and I think that we can agree on, is that our emotions are based on beliefs, and our reaction to things are unique based on those beliefs and experiences that we've had. So in order to be able to change our emotional reaction or even just understand it, we need to look at those beliefs and experiences. And I know you are engaged in a lot of therapy. That's something you're very passionate about. How can therapy really help someone look at past experiences and their own beliefs in a more objective way to get to the bottom of negative emotions that they no longer desire to feel, or just to understand them?
Well, I think you just summed it up right there. The best therapy available would be a talk therapy that explores these. You have the options of cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is used primarily for this intention, to look at your behavioral responses and look back cognitively and see where those behavioral responses have taken root, where those thought patterns first originated, and how to go about changing those.
Interesting. So what could someone expect from an experience with cognitive therapy? What would it look like if you walked into a session?
Cognitive therapy is primarily a talk-based therapy with a very Socratic method to it. So you're going to have a therapist asking a lot of questions, looking back at the root of each response. If you do the stereotypical, well, how do you feel today? Or how did that make you feel? The answer would be followed up with, well, why do you think that is why you feel that way? What caused you to feel this way? What did it remind you of? Has there been another experience that you felt the same way? How did that turn out?
Interesting. I think it's really great to be able to get that kind of insight, because a lot of people get nervous about therapy sessions and going to therapy, and mainly it's that they don't know what to expect. So, I mean, I hope that that insight helped a few people seek out the therapy that they need. And even the therapy that they want, even if you don't need it, sometimes therapy can be really great, even if it's just something you feel is best for you. And so one of the things that was really important that struck me about emotional libertarianism is what happens when we don't take responsibility for our emotions. And I think, there needs to be an upside and a downside. And so the upside is that you have the ability to get to happy. How long that takes is dependent on you and the situation, but there are benefits to taking responsibility for your emotions, but there are downsides to not taking responsibility. When we don't take responsibility for our emotions, we often look for reassurance outside that doesn't lead to a happy life. When you don't take responsibility for defining your own adequacy and worth, or creating your own inner sense of safety, you will seek to feel adequate, worthy, and safe externally. Whatever you do not give yourself, you may seek from others or from substances or processes. Emotional dependency is the opposite of taking personal responsibility for one's emotional well-being. Yet many people have no idea that this is their responsibility, nor do they have any idea to take this responsibility. So people will often seek out, alcohol or drugs when they feel unhappy, because they believe that emotions are controlled externally. And sometimes they'll get into bad relationships and stay in bad relationships because of the good times, and they feel like they can't have those good emotions outside of those relationships. And so what would be your perspective on this, Leslie?
I think that is all very true. We do seek this validation from external stimuli, but I don't think it's restricted to bad relationships or drugs. I think we see that a lot in our modern culture right now with this overly PC and all the trigger warnings. This was just something I thought of right now, but I see a lot of the groups I'm in on Facebook, they post extraneous trigger warnings, like not things that would really be psychologically defined as a trigger. But you have all of these out there, and I think it's because we've gotten so used to thinking that the people around us are responsible for how we feel about something, that they must warn us in case we read something we're upset by.
Interesting. So it's almost like a warning label on this coffee is hot. It's, we have to put warning labels on shows because we may swear and that might upset people, or we might talk about something outside of their belief system. I feel like I need to put a warning label on this show does not confine to standard relationships of our society. So, I totally agree with you. I mean, our culture has become obsessed with warning labels, and being politically correct. That's another one, is being politically correct. You don't want to upset anybody by the things that you say. But the problem is you're going to upset somebody when you speak. The only way to not upset anybody is to not say anything.
And I think,
like I said, you can get upset about the word cats.
And I think it's things like that are so indicative of the fact that we've lost touch with emotional libertarianism. We view other people as being responsible for how we feel. So we see this need for trigger warnings and content warnings on everything because we don't recognize our ability to control our reaction to these words, to these ideas or thoughts that are being presented to us. We've lost touch with our own responsibility.
Agreed. And, I mean, something that really branches off of that is, and something that I want to go over is emotions are extremely unique by the person. And so a lot of people spend a lot of time talking to their friends about how they feel. And, they say, I feel sad, about this thing, and this is upsetting me. But your friend has a totally different experience with the word sad. And so one of the things we have to stop and consider is, first of all, what our vocabulary is. And nonviolent communication, something that we'll be talking about in the future, has a very good understanding and talk about our emotional vocabulary so that we can express ourselves better. But even with that vocabulary, we need to understand that other people's, when we express our emotions, their experience with that emotion is completely different than our own. And so, it's one of the most beautiful things about humans is their uniqueness of experiencing emotions, but also one of the most frustrating to communicate. What do you think, Leslie? Like, how does that play in therapy when you're talking to another human being with a different experience of emotions?
I agree that we all experience these emotions differently, but I don't think they're as drastic as you're making them out to be. I think primarily this points to a need for specific definitions and choosing the right word, because sad incorporates a whole range of feelings. But if you choose the exact word, I'm forlorn, then that means something very particular, and somebody else is going to be able to understand more accurately your feeling. I think in therapy, particularly, your therapist, your practitioner is going to be very particular about the word choice when talking with you, in an effort to accurately understand what you're actually feeling. And I think that we need to make an effort ourselves in all of our communication to be very particular with our word choice, so that others can better understand where we're coming from.
Exactly. That's why I emphasize the communication. And I didn't mean to make it sound as drastic as I did, but mainly I emphasized it because it's important to understand that the only person that's going to be able to truly 100% understand you and the way that you feel is you. And that's why we need to be responsible for our own feelings, so that we feel the comfort that we need to feel, because you can only find that comfort, that true 100% comfort, by accepting how you feel yourself. Nobody else can make you feel the acceptance that you need to feel for that emotion. And when you seek validation, yes, it's helpful to seek a therapist, it's helpful to talk to friends, but that validation is ultimately going to come from inside. What do you think, Leslie? Did I hit it a little bit better?
I completely agree.
Awesome. So one of the things that I discovered upon doing research into this topic is the 6 levels of emotional maturity. And I really like this. I think that what's so great about it is that it gives you a way to become more emotionally mature if that's something you're seeking, which I advise. But, I don't obviously wouldn't force it on anybody. But if you want to become a more emotionally mature person, it helps if you have steps, and it's not just, I'm going to be more emotionally mature. It's a process. All of these things.
Just totally say.
Agreed. So I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be emotionally mature tomorrow. So
easier said than done.
So much easier. So one of the things that you can do is take it as day by day. And this process, I think, really helps. So level 1 of emotional maturity is emotional responsibility. So when a person reaches level 1 of emotional maturity, then he or she realizes that he or she can no longer view his or her emotional states as the responsibility of external forces such as people, places, things, forces, fate, or spirits. He or she learns to drop expressions from his or her speech that show disownership of feelings and a helpless or victim attitude towards his or her feelings. And this will come in nonviolent communication with the language. It'll give you a new language that will allow you to express your emotions without blaming other people for them. And that'll strengthen your relationships with other people. And so the reason we really want to talk about emotional libertarianism is not because we want to sit here and be like, oh, we're so emotionally mature and let me show you how emotionally mature we are. It's because it will strengthen your relationships to be able to accept your emotions and accept responsibility, and then be able to communicate in a way that shows that responsibility. You'll find that your relationship with your partner has become stronger because now you're focused on dealing with the emotion instead of who's to blame. And so what do you think, Leslie? Is this a good first step, what we're talking about here?
Of course. I mean, we have to be able to admit that our emotions are ours, and that's where emotional maturity comes into play before we can move on to any of the other basic skills for relationships.
I agree. You know, it's amazing to me how big that step can seem, though. Is there anything that people can do to prepare themselves and get themselves to step number one? Because step number one seems really difficult.
It seems really difficult, but we're taught it from a very young age, amazingly. In public school, we're taught to use I statements from like kindergarten on. I don't know about you. I was taught to use every school I've ever attended, every grade, they tell you to use I statements because the other person didn't make you feel that way. I feel this way because this happened. And I think it's such a wonderful thing and such a wonderful way to start teaching emotional maturity at a young age. Just that basic reframing changes the entire way that you process your emotions by taking responsibility for them.
I absolutely 100% agree. I wish I had been taught that in school. I didn't. I went through the process of learning I statements, and the difference and the disconnect may have been that I went to a Catholic school for most of my life, which, yes, Catholic school girl here, which preaches a philosophy of altruism, and therefore everyone is responsible for everyone. So it may have the disconnect may be there, because a society that preaches altruism is not going to necessarily state that you are responsible for your own feelings. It might, but I could see why that might have been left out of the curriculum intentionally or even unintentionally.
Maybe. All I know is that in public school, and goodness knows public school is not perfect, but this is one of the good things that they did. This is one of the ways that they actually went right, is they taught this from early on. Use I statements, especially when you're having an argument or a disagreement. If you're 5 years old and you go up to the teacher because Billy stole your crayons, I'm mad because Billy stole my crayons, not Billy made me mad and he stole my crayons. Like, you would be corrected and you'd have to rephrase it in an I statement.
Yeah, that's awesome. I
think a lot of people by the time they reach adulthood have stopped using I statements.
Why do you think that is, if we're taught so young?
I have no idea. Part of me thinks it's because going back to this societal shift where we've started assuming responsibility for everyone's emotions and that everyone assumes responsibility for our emotions, we've just kind of let it slip. I know I spend too much time on Tumblr, let me tell you. The SJWs on Tumblr, you never see them make an I statement. It's always, you did this wrong, or you shouldn't have said that, not I'm upset because of this.
What's SJW?
Social justice warrior.
Oh, okay. All right. I wasn't familiar with that one. So now we know. So the next step in emotional maturity is emotional honesty. Emotional honesty concerns the willingness of a person to know and own his or her feelings. This is a necessary step to self-acceptance and self-understanding. The issue of resistance to self-discovery is dealt with at this level. Resistance issues stem from the person's conscious and unconscious fears of dealing directly with the critical voices he or she hears inside her head. So it's a willingness to say, I feel this way. And, that's okay for in my case, I guess maybe Leslie might disagree with this, but it's okay that I feel this way and I don't understand why yet. For me, it's all about that process of asking why and then being able to say, well, is this emotion logical in this situation? But, Leslie has a little more of a compassionate approach to emotions than I do, I think. But I think that we can both agree that it's about first saying, okay, I feel this way. And it's that acceptance of that emotion and allowing it in so that you can really understand it. What do you think, Leslie?
I completely agree with the emotional honesty here. It's recognizing the emotion and then looking at it and analyzing why. I don't necessarily believe that your emotion has to or even should change after you analyze why. I think you did point out that fundamental difference. I recognize that emotion is still being valid, still being there, even if I've analyzed it. I can analyze it and go, well, it's completely illogical, but that doesn't change what I'm feeling.
Agreed. And there's a note in here that I think is really important. It says when people don't learn emotional coping skills, they generally lose most interactions with their internal adversity, internal critic, negative self-talk, or hyperactive conscience. Therefore, most people's fears of emotional honesty are based on past ego pain from being internally judged as worse than, lower than, or inferior to others. Most of our fear of being less than and feeling less than comes inside. Most people, I think, that at least people I interact with, never intentionally make me feel less like lower than them or make themselves seem superior to me. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's the people I interact with, but I don't get a lot of that. It's internal.
That wonderful quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent.
Absolutely. So do you think that, a regular person going through their day-to-day life, I mean, I live in a very different community than most people, but would you say, that as a society, we mainly treat people as on the same level? It's that internal critic that makes us feel inferior.
Oh, I think that's a normal part of the human experience. Whether it be healthy or not, that is how we process the world. You've read a little bit of Kathy Reisenwitz. At one point, she called it Bitch Kathy inside her head. Bitch Kathy keeps telling me that I'm not as good. But I think we all have that little bitch Leslie or bitch Lauren inside our head. Sorry, I'm cursing, and I know your parents are right there.
No, actually, they left the room for a little bit, so perfect timing. It's true. I mean, we all have this little voice in our heads, and you gotta get to a point where you just say, no, you're wrong. Because I don't know what it is inside of us that thinks everybody is so great besides ourselves. I mean, we're not even good judges of the way that we look externally. I'm guilty of this. Everybody's guilty of this. We search for acceptance externally because of the bitch voice in our head. And even the most beautiful, the smartest, the most athletic, the strongest, all do it. We're all subject to it. And it's not about overcoming that voice. It's about being able to shorten the time between hearing the voice, feeling bad about the voice, and realizing that the voice is probably blowing it way out of proportion.
And you'll see this all the time when you get groups of women together, like, oh, honey, you're so pretty. And they're like, no, I'm really not. But you're so pretty. And they'll just go back and forth on it. I know you, Laurel, and I did that right before the last show last time. It's that bitch voice coming out in all of us.
Oh, it is. And, I feel like when we go around to that little circle, I actually feel less secure. The more people tell me that I look pretty, the less secure I feel. It's like, what are you accounting for? Like, are you compensating for something? But level 3 of emotional maturity is emotional openness. This level concerns a person's willingness to share and skills in sharing his or her feelings in an appropriate manner and at appropriate times. Persons at this level experience and learn the value of venting feelings to let feelings go, and also the danger involved in hiding feelings from self and others. Self-disclosure is the important issue at this level of emotional maturity, yet self-disclosure will never be as important as the willingness of the person to be open to experiencing all of his or her feelings as they arise without the critical voices he or she hears inside, trying to change, control, or condemn those feelings. The dangers of suppressing feelings and the value inherent in exploring all the feelings and allowing them internal expression are investigated further over time at this level. So I think it's really important to investigate our feelings and to look at them objectively. Because often we have these feelings that we don't enjoy having. I mean, there might be people out there that feel sad, that enjoy feeling sad, but I don't. I feel like by definition, you can't be happy feeling sad, but I don't want to judge other people and say there's nobody out there that likes feeling sad. If you enjoy feeling sad, then ignore what I'm about to say. But
what's that song? I'm only happy when it rains.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good song, actually. I'm trying to think the name of it. And so there's like this desire inside of us to stop feeling these emotions when certain things happen, and every time it happens, like clockwork, we feel sad or angry or unhappy, and then later we're like, oh, why did I feel that way? I don't want to feel this way about this. It's ridiculous. And so exploring that emotion allows you to kind of get to a point where that isn't your instant reaction.
I think we see this a lot in the polyamory community when it comes to the feeling of jealousy.
Yes.
Because we are trained from such a young age when we encounter certain situations to feel jealous.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean,
but then we have this thing in the community where we don't want to talk about jealousy. Like, we don't want to admit that we ever feel jealous, so we keep it all bottled up.
Yeah. Because it makes you bad at poly or something. It's like this stigma. Like, if you're jealous, then you're bad at poly, which is ridiculous. Everybody feels jealous. It's just an instant, it's a part of the human experience. But it's about looking at that jealousy and saying, where does this jealousy come from? And if you can look at the jealousy and say, okay, I'm not getting this or I'm not getting that from my partner, and I need this or I want this, then we're able to turn it into a solvable problem. And it's not about not feeling those feelings. It's about being able to say, okay, so how do I fix it? How do I solve this problem?
And I think sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just going to say that jealousy, I talked about this in my speech. Jealousy is not real. It's the things that are underneath it that are making you feel bad. The jealousy is just something we say to excuse ourselves from trying to figure out what it is that we need or want.
Well, again, we disagreed. I disagreed with you on stage about that. I think jealousy is a completely real thing, even though it may have different roots. But I think one of the things that this particular stage of emotional maturity, this stage of emotional openness, it's so important to be able to share this feeling in an appropriate way at the appropriate time. Now, I have a little personal story.
Oh, please share.
Yeah. At one point this month, I got friend-zoned.
Ooh.
I had a partner, and we had been sexual, and we hadn't been able to see each other a lot and whatever. And we sat down and we talked, and he was like, listen, we need to be platonic for a while. Like, there are some things in my life, we need to be platonic for a while. Okay. And this hurt the hell out of me, but I could handle it. Until the next week when he asked me, hey, I want you to meet this girl. And it was the only sexual partner that he had kept. during this time period in his life. The jealousy raged. Like,
Ooh. Yeah.
my insecurity. I was like, what is she better than me? Like, is she prettier than me? She's got to be so much better in every way than me if he was going to keep her and not me.
The bitch voice.
The bitch voice was going crazy. She just kept talking and talking and talking. But this is where the emotional openness came in. I stepped back. I took a few days. I analyzed where I was feeling. I kept him up to date on it. And eventually I was able to come back to him and be like, this is what I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling it. And this is where the insecurities have stemmed from in my life. And I just want you to know. And I think that is, and I'm not trying to toot my horn, but that is the perfect example of emotional openness.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a really great story. I mean, this is why you should be a therapist. No, I mean, I agree. And I mean, you handled it the only, emotionally mature way you can handle it. I mean, obviously you're going to feel those feelings of insecurity because we're human beings and we're going to get the bitch voice no matter what we do. But you handled it by expressing yourself and not bottling your emotions up. Bottling them up does nothing. We spend all of this time worrying that when we share our emotions, other people are going to make us feel bad about them. And they don't. They rarely ever make you feel bad about your emotions if you use an I statement. They will instead come to your rescue most often. And people that do make you feel bad when you use that I statement and taken ownership for that, they're not really very good people.
No. That's the definition of abuse. That is emotional abuse. And we are not accepting that as a valid reaction here.
Nope.
I think one of the things that we're not talking about here, but needs to be brought up, is the appropriate time and the appropriate way in which to share our emotions.
Yes.
All too often, we have this trope, this stereotype of a man and a woman having an argument over dinner, and she gets mad and she vents at him. She yells at him, saying why she's mad, and she can use I statements all she wants. She'll storm off. That is not the appropriate way or the time in which to express your emotions. No matter how honest or mature or responsible you are of them, the openness was incorrect. So I think that this is a very important trait that we need to include in our emotional maturity, in our emotional libertarianism.
Agreed. There, I mean, the most famous philosophers will tell you there's a time and place for everything. And there's a time and place for expressing our emotions. And one of the other places is certainly not in front of other people. One of the things you don't want to do is go in raging bitch mode right in front of everybody at a table when you're out with your significant other. I've watched men and women do this. I've
watched men do this too.
No, yeah, that's why I said men and women alike will do this. I mean, they'll just fly off the handle in front of people. And I've had people do it to me. And I have immediately broken it off. I will not be with people that don't understand the proper time and place. And it's not about the emotion. I have no issue with the emotion. In fact, they can use blame words, and I'm probably not going to take it that personally because I'm just starting to use I terms myself. So, I can't really judge people who have had a hard time with it. But I will say that, I have broken it off with people that don't understand the time, because the time is actually even more important than the I statements. When you embarrass me, then it's worse than blaming me for your emotions. It has now just caused issues with all of these other people. And so now I not only have to deal with fixing our relationship, I had to fix my relationships with these other people. And when my relationships with other people hurt my relationships with the people in my life, then I normally end up cutting those people loose if it's a reoccurring event. So I think time's even more important.
Make a very good point here that Social media becoming so prevalent in our society is also not an appropriate way to vent emotions, no matter how valid or responsible they are. It is not an appropriate time or place to vent emotions.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I watch people express their emotions on Facebook, and I just don't understand why they think that's going to end up in anything but more hurt emotions.
I mean, sometimes I'll do it in order to process and get like feedback, but it's how you do it that's the thing. It's like, this situation happened to me with an unnamed person, and this is how I feel. Like, give me feedback. Versus, this person made me feel this. This person did this, and I felt this way. Like, they're two very different situations.
I mean, I think we're like a few years away from a show called Facebook Wars. And I think there are real life Facebook wars out there where people yell at each other through their statuses and blame people and call out people through their statuses. I've watched it. And I don't
have you
understand.
Seen those memes where they'll make Facebook accounts for the countries, like for World War I, and showed who said what to the other person?
Oh, God.
And they like relationship breakup. Like Germany and Prussia are no longer
friends on Facebook.
Yeah.
That's great. That's really
Russia blocked the US. Yeah, you need to go read those.
That's really funny. Okay, so level 4, because we're drawing close to the end. A person at this level of work enters a new era of positive self-expression. The primary goal here is to be able to ask for and receive the nurturing that he or she needs and wants, first from self and then from others. He or she asserts his or her emotional needs in all of his or her relationships, if it's safe to do so. As a secondary goal, he or she also learns how to express any feelings appropriately in any situation. For example, how to express a feeling without aggressive or manipulative undertones. That's something we'll talk about in nonviolent communication, is about asking versus telling. And there's a way that we ask and a way that we tell. And it can even just be with your vocal tones. I know that there's been instances where Ryan has looked at me and said, I know that it sounds like you're asking me to do something. I know that to you, those words mean you're asking, but your tone is telling. And, and so, yeah, I think that's really important. I'm sure you have some insight here, Leslie.
Are you a nag? Because
I can be a nag.
That's the classic thing with the nag, is somebody who asks, but their tone is telling. It's such an ongoing relationship problem. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I rarely do it. It's really become when I ask him to do things a few times, something that I really need, and then he doesn't do it. And then when I ask him again, you can tell that it's really the last straw. And so I never do it as a primary way of communicating. I'm trying to stop doing it altogether. But when it's something that I really need him to do, that only he can do, and I, like get something off the top shelf.
Feel that. I totally feel that.
And then I get to the point where I get just a little bit bossy about it. And it's like, I need you to get this off the top shelf, please. You can tell at that point, it's like, if I have to ask you again, I may find someone else to start getting things off the top shelf for me.
But it's so telling of society that has become a trope. Women who ask, quote unquote, with a telling tone, with a demanding tone. It's so indicative of an unhealthy culture.
Agreed. And I have tried and worked. I've become a lot better at not doing that particular telling thing. I don't think I've engaged in it, at least in like the last 2 months, which is good. But, I also sat him down and said, when I ask you to do something, I would appreciate it if you tell me that you are not going to get to it till this specific period of time, or tell me that you can't do it, or tell me, basically give me like a time frame, or tell me you're not going to do it. Don't just not do it. And so because when he says, yeah, I'll do it, and it's not done like 3 days later, then at that point I'm at my wit's end. But I finally got to the point where I sat him down and I told him that this is what I need, because he doesn't like the nag voice. And so if he doesn't like the nag voice, this is what I need in return. And so we made a nonviolent communication and decided that that was what we were going to do from now on.
Sounds like you guys have a very healthy communication style there. I completely understand coming from a mindset where nagging was it was just the default. Like, if I ask you 5 times, I'm going to start getting that exasperated voice. Like, will you please just do this?
Yes.
And
exactly.
I mean, you can, before my current primary, you can ask them. And I used to be a horrible nag because they just wouldn't, like, they wouldn't do
they said they were going to do.
They said they were going to do it, but we didn't discuss any of the other aspects of doing that one thing. Like, when are you going to get it done?
Yeah.
Is it like, we didn't discuss that. So that fundamental miscommunication.
Exactly. So I always follow up any request to do things with, okay, so I'm going to need a time frame. Like, I don't even need an exact time. I just need a time frame. Let's start with now, and then we'll go to what day can I finally look at you with the angry face? Like, when am I allowed to go to angry face? And I never do before the time frame is up. But beware if the time frame ends. But the next level is emotional understanding. Persons on this level of emotional maturity understand the actual cause and effect processes of emotional responsibility and emotional irresponsibility. Self-concepts are understood to be the problem interfering with emotional responsibility. Such a person realizes that it's not possible to have a so-called good self-concept without a complementary bad self-concept. And so what do you think of this, Leslie? I want to go over this one and then 6 really quickly within our last 8 minutes. Leslie?
Yeah, I'm processing. Just give me
processing. I totally understand. So because of the nature of knowledge and the formation of self-concepts, such people experience firsthand that all self-concepts contain their opposites, knowing that one half of some self-concepts duality is still active in him or her, even if he or she hides it in darkness, unconsciousness, or he or she begins to regularly leap beyond the pitfalls of self-concepts, self-images, and self-constructs. The knowledge of the unity of the opposites of self-concepts and of knowledge is applied daily to new situations. Little bit clearer?
Yeah, I think It's pretty clear as it stands. I don't really have much to add to that, apart from
me neither.
Maybe this is where you and I are having that misunderstanding, that that fundamental difference earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Where I recognize that difference as still being valid. Like, jealousy, or I'm upset at a situation, even though it's not logical, I still think it's valid. It's still fundamentally there.
Interesting. I think we'd probably need to do a whole talk on what valid means. So we'd have to look at the definition of valid. But, that's not really the point in the show, but we should have a whole show on that. I think that would be good. So,
well, I think that right there is where we're finding our difference.
Is the definition of valid?
No, at this level.
Oh,
okay. Level of emotional understanding, ignoring the word valid. It's being able to recognize that self-concept, good or bad, are both there.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, we'll have to We'll have to do more on this, I guess. But level 6 is emotional detachment. At this level, the person lives without the burden and snares of self-concepts, self-images, self-constructs, group concepts, and things concepts. Such a person is only aware of self as process, as a sensing being, as an experiencing being, as a living vessel, as unknowable and untrappable, because self is alive and not static or fixed. Such a person has died to the life of self as self-concepts. True detachment from all self-concepts has occurred. Thus, true detachment from others has also occurred, which means that the absolute emotional responsibility has been achieved, actually discovered. What do you think of this, Leslie?
I think that is a wonderful goal that very few of us are ever going to reach.
I absolutely agree. I think that it's like the characters in Ayn Rand's novels. We'll never be them because they're perfect, but they're also, two-dimensional characters, so it's very difficult to be them. Dagny works all the time, which is impossible. We never see her relax. And
She tried once, remember?
She tried and it went horribly, but that's not real. But it's still great to strive for the perfection. It's great to have her as a model, as a goal, because then we never stop striving.
I think emotional detachment also fits nicely into both Maslow's hierarchy of self-actualization at the very top of the pyramid and in the Buddhist idea of detachment.
Nirvana, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. That's what I think of is self-actualization and nirvana. So I think that that's, the state where we finally are just kind of one with everything, which is a great thing to strive for. But, monks have been spending like 40 years trying and not achieving. So, give yourself a break when you're not perfect. You're going to fail at emotional libertarianism over and over again for the rest of your life. But the failings will become less and less as you practice. So I want to end this episode with saying thank you guys so much for joining us, and let Leslie tell you where you can find her.
You guys can find me at lesliepetersen.com, LESLEEPETERSEN.com.
Awesome. And Leslie is becoming a relationship coach. You should definitely check out her relationship coaching. And she is fantastic. We will have her on again in 2 weeks. Next week, I will be joined by Laurel. And of course, as always, our topic will be a surprise. So make sure you tune in next week and every week to learn more and more about alternative relationships. Whether you're in one or you're just interested in them, this is a show that I really believe can become something incredible. So remember, all love is beautiful.